Somewhere beneath the marble of Ephesus, in the salt-thick air of a harbor city that has not drawn breath in 15 centuries, a question was pressed into parchment and passed between hands in the dark. Not a prayer, not a hymn, a calculation. A riddle designed to survive the censors, outlast the emperor, and reach you, specifically you, across the entire length of time that separates that bruised and burning century from the room where you are lying now. The question was this: whose number is it? You are entering the world of Revelation 13. Not the sanitized version, not the stained glass version where a placid lamb surveys a gentle eternity. The version written in the shadow of Nero, in the language of coercion and coin and branded flesh, by a Jewish Christian visionary who understood that the most dangerous truths must be spoken sideways, cloaked in numbers, threaded through symbols, wrapped in the image of a monster no single empire could claim as its own. Let that darkness settle around you now. Let the world outside your window go soft and far away. The beast that rises from the sea in Revelation 13 is not one creature. That is the first thing to understand, and it is important. It has 7 heads, 10 horns, and crowns stacked on its brow like stolen sovereignty. Its body is the body of a leopard, quick, spotted, imperial in its cold efficiency. Its feet are the feet of a bear. Its mouth is the mouth of a lion, and from that mouth comes not a roar, but a word, and the word is a name, and the name is a blasphemy. This is not an animal that evolution could have produced. It is something assembled, stitched together from the worst of every empire that has ever swallowed a nation whole. It is what power looks like when power stops pretending to be good. The sea it rises from is not metaphor. It is the Mediterranean, the dark body of water that Rome crossed and taxed and salted with the bones of the people it could not otherwise silence. And the dragon on the shore hands it a throne. What John of Patmos saw was this: the Roman Empire, not as a political inconvenience, as a cosmic parasite, as a beast wearing the shape of civilization, performing miracles in the theater squares of Asia Minor, animating its own image in the temples, making the statue breathe and speak through the mechanics of spectacle and fear. You have to hold that scene in your mind with some care, because it is not abstract. It is architectural. The large temple of the imperial cult stood in Ephesus at the head of the market road that ran from the city center toward the harbor. If you were a trader in the 1st century, you walked past that temple every morning. You smelled the incense, you heard the acclamations, you did not get to look away. And then there was the coin. The Greek word John uses for the mark is charagma. Feel the weight of that word before you let it become merely spiritual. In the ancient world, a charagma was the imperial seal pressed into official documents, the brand burned into livestock, the stamped image of the emperor on the face of every coin in circulation. When the text warns that no one can buy or sell without the mark, without the name, without the number, it is not describing a future technology. It is describing Tuesday morning in a Roman market. It is describing the sensation of holding money that carries a man's face and his divine titles on one side and the instruments of his authority on the other. Every transaction was a small act of acknowledgement. Every purchase was a prayer you did not choose to speak. Nero made this worse in a way that the history books record quietly, but the body remembers loudly. Facing the ruin of a city he may or may not have burned himself, he debased the currency. He reduced the weight of gold. He pulled the silver out of the coins by degrees, so slowly that the hand could not quite feel the difference, but the body eventually could. In the cost of grain, in the face of a merchant who would no longer take what you offered, in the spreading understanding that the empire's money was worth whatever the empire decided it was worth on any given morning. In Alexandria alone, between the years 65 and 66, the silver content of the standard coin fell from roughly 23% to 15%. You are holding less and less of something real, and more of a face. And the face is Nero's. And the titles around the face call him divine. You are standing in that market now. Feel the coin in your palm. Read the face stamped upon it. Notice that you cannot eat without spending it, and you cannot spend it without touching the name. That is the mark. That is the original mark. Not a microchip in a vein, not a scanner at a border. A coin, in your hand, in the middle of an ordinary morning, in a city that the empire has already decided owns you. The number came later, or rather, the number was always there, pressed into the same parchment, waiting for those who had the particular kind of knowledge required to hear it. The instruction in Revelation 13:18 is not a warning. It is an invitation. The text does not say, "Beware this number." It says, "Calculate it." The Greek word used is sephisato. Let the one who has understanding work out the sum. That is not the language of prophecy in the conventional sense. That is the language of a puzzle box, left deliberately open for the hands of someone who knows how to read in two alphabets at once. Here is what those hands would have done. In the ancient Mediterranean world, letters were numbers. There were no separate Arabic numerals yet. The Greek alphabet carried numerical weight in every character. Alpha was 1, beta was 2, and so on through the full range of units and tens and hundreds. The Hebrew system worked the same way. A name written out could be summed. A sum could contain a name. This was not occultism. It was literacy, in a world where literacy itself was a narrow door, and what passed through that door was often the most dangerous thing available. The author of Revelation was a Jewish Christian visionary writing in Greek, in exile, under an empire that killed people for saying the wrong name too loudly. To write Nero in plain text was to hold a blade to your own throat. To write his number, the sum of his name, transliterated from Greek into Hebrew consonants, calculated in a system that Roman censors likely did not use and did not fully understand, was to pass the blade to a friend in the dark, handle first, without making a sound. The name is Neron Kaiser, written in Hebrew consonants, Nun, Resh, Wa, Nun, Kof, Samek, Resh. The values are 50, 200, 6, 50, 100, 60, 200. Add them slowly, the way someone in a candlelit room would have added them, checking each letter against a system memorized from childhood. The total is 666. The number is the Emperor. The beast has a name, and the name is a calculation, and the calculation lands, with the precision of something designed rather than discovered, on the man who used Christians as fuel for his garden parties, on the man whose financial policies squeezed the silver out of the currency until the coin in your hand was mostly the emperor's face and almost nothing else, on the man whose death in 68 AD did not end the fear he had planted, because the fear had already become systemic, and systems outlive the people who build them. Let the numbers slow now. Let them settle. Feel what they meant to someone for whom a calculation was the difference between speaking clearly and speaking safely, between surviving the week and not. There is a second number, and it matters more than most popular accounts allow. Papyrus 115, the oldest surviving manuscript of Revelation, discovered in the Egyptian city of Oxyrhynchus and dated to sometime in the 3rd century, does not say 666. It says 616. For a long time, this discrepancy was treated as an embarrassment, a scribal error, a bad copy, a minor anomaly to be acknowledged and set aside. Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, knew about the 616 reading. He defended 666 as the number preserved in the earliest and most reliable copies he had access to. He attributed 616 to poor transcription. But modern textual scholarship has followed the math somewhere more interesting. If you transliterate Nero's name not from its Greek spelling, but from its Latin spelling, Nero Caesar, dropping the final Greek N that carries a value of 50, the Hebrew consonants produce a different sum. Nun, Resh, Wa, Kof, Samek, Resh. 50, 200, 6, 100, 60, 200. The total is 616. The Latin-speaking communities to the west of John's original audience arrived at the same emperor through a slightly different door, and the number on the other side of that door was 616. 2 numbers, 1 target. The beast wears different numerals depending on which language you approach it from, and that instability is not a flaw. It is a feature. It proves that the early readers understood the riddle was a portrait, not a barcode. They were doing the work of recognition, not memorization. They were asking, who does this calculation describe? And the answer they arrived at, from multiple directions, in multiple dialects, was the same dead man. The man whose logic had not died with him. Because that is the other thing about Nero, and the thing that makes the cipher genuinely unsettling in the way that good dread always is. He died in 68 AD, abandoned, widely despised, reportedly by his own hand. And yet, the fear he generated did not end on schedule. A rumor circulated almost immediately, the Nero Redivivus legend, that he had not truly died, that he had fled east to the Parthians, that he would return at the head of an army. Some who heard about the beast rising from the sea heard something else underneath it. The sound of a dead emperor coming back, because empires do not let their emperors stay dead if the idea of them is still useful. The wound that heals. The beast that seemed to have died and lived again. The text carries that detail precisely because power is not a person. Power is a pattern. And the pattern Nero embodied, the fusion of divine claim, economic coercion, and spectacular punishment, outlasted his body by centuries. It does not need him to continue. It only needs a throne and an image and a market. The beast does not roar in this story. It does not need to. It has a seal and a marketplace, and that is enough. Before the number, before the calculation, before the parchment and the cipher and the exile on Patmos, there was the body. There was always the body. The mark did not begin with Revelation. It began much earlier, in the long human history of pressing ownership into skin. In Egypt, religious tattooing left traces on mummies and figurines from the Middle Kingdom period onward. Pilgrims marked themselves with symbols of devotion. Slaves were branded to identify whose hands they had been bound to. In the Greco-Roman world and across the cults of Asia Minor, dedication to a deity could be written on the body, a small mark, a sign that said, "This person belongs somewhere, and the somewhere is not entirely of this world." The body was a document. The body was a ledger. And the question that ran beneath all of it, centuries before John wrote a word of revelation, was the same question the text eventually makes explicit. Whose name is on you? That question had a Jewish answer long before it had a Roman one. The book of Deuteronomy commands that the words of the covenant be bound as a sign on the hand and worn as a marker between the eyes. This is not metaphor in the way that modern readers might assume. In Second Temple Judaism, this passage was embodied literally. In the phylacteries, small leather boxes containing scripture bound to the arm and the forehead during prayer. The Qumran community, the desert sect whose documents were discovered in the caves above the Dead Sea, understood this binding in intensely physical terms. The hand and forehead were already theological real estate. They were already the site of competing claims about who a person owed their labor and their attention to. John of Patmos knew this. He was writing inside that tradition, not outside it. When he describes the beast demanding a mark on the right hand and the forehead, he is not inventing a new horror. He is inverting a familiar one. The beast's mark is a dark mirror of the covenant sign, the same locations on the body, the same logic of belonging, but reversed. Where the Torah said, "Bind these words to yourself as a sign of your bond with the God who freed you from slavery," the beast says, "Bear my name as proof that you participate in the system that enslaved you." The forehead and the hand are not random. The forehead is where you hold your identity. The hand is where you do your work. Together, they represent what you think and what you do, what you believe and what you labor for. The mark colonizes both. It asks for the whole person, not merely the surface. This is the philosophical core that popular culture tends to lose in the noise about numbers and chips and scanning technology. The mark is not primarily a surveillance mechanism. It is a claim of ownership over the interior life, expressed through the exterior economy. Now hold that interior scene alongside the exterior one. Because Revelation's horror is not only philosophical, it is theatrical, and it is specific about its stage. The cities of Western Asia Minor, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Laodicea, were not abstract locations in John's imagination. They were the first audiences. He named them by name in the opening chapters. He addressed them directly, as communities with specific problems, specific failures, specific pressures. And the specific pressure that runs beneath all of them is the pressure of the imperial cult, the system by which the Roman emperor was worshipped as a divine figure, not merely respected as a political one, in a network of temples, festivals, sacrifices, and civic ceremonies that a person could not easily opt out of without consequences. In Ephesus, a large temple dedicated to the imperial cult stood near the upper route of the market road that descended from the city center toward the harbor. Commerce and worship occupied the same corridor. You did not go to the market without passing the temple. You did not do business in that city without operating inside a civic space that was soaked in the imagery of the emperor's divine authority, his face on coins, his titles on inscriptions, his statue in the sanctuary, his festivals setting the rhythm of the civic calendar. Participation in the economy was participation in the cult, not because someone held a blade to your throat on any given morning, but because the infrastructure of daily survival had been built around the assumption of that participation. Refusal was not punishable as refusal. It was punishable as poverty, as exclusion, as the slow starvation of economic isolation. And then there was the image that speaks. Revelation describes the second beast causing a great image of the first beast to be erected, and then, and this detail is worth sitting with, causing it to have breath so that the image could speak, and those who did not worship it could be identified and killed. The image that breathes, the statue that becomes animate. This sounds like science fiction until you understand that the ancient world already had a theology for it. In Mesopotamia, Elaborate ritual sequences called the mouth-washing and mouth-opening ceremonies were performed on newly carved cult statues. The purpose was to prepare the image to function as a genuine divine presence, to transfer something of the god into the carved stone or gilded wood, so that the statue was not merely a representation, but a residence. The statue was not God, but God could move through it. It had a kind of borrowed life. When John's audience heard about an image that receives breath and speaks, they were not hearing something categorically impossible. They were hearing something that claimed to do what the divine cult had always claimed its images could do. Only this time, the presence inside the statue was not the God of Israel, but the beast of empire, and the miracle was being performed not by priests in a consecrated sanctuary, but by a political power that had learned to stage transcendence for commercial and coercive ends. The horror is not supernatural. The horror is that it works. People marvel, the text says. The whole world marvels. They do not run from the beast. They follow it, willingly, because the spectacle is genuinely impressive, and the alternative is genuinely frightening, and the mark is the practical token of a decision that most people in most empires have already made before they fully understand they are making it. Across from the marked stands the sealed. Revelation holds these two populations in deliberate contrast throughout. The servants of God bear a seal on their foreheads. In Revelation 7, 4 angels hold back the winds of destruction while the faithful are marked, one by one, before the catastrophe begins. The seal is not a brand of ownership in the beast's sense. It is a mark of protection, of belonging to something that does not trade in human survival for human conformity. 2 inscriptions, 2 systems. 2 answers to the question that was always already being asked. Whose name is on you, and what did you give up to put it there? There is a number that appears in the Hebrew Scriptures, long before Revelation was written, in a context so different from apocalyptic prophecy that most readers walk past it without pausing. It appears in the Book of Kings, in the account of Solomon's reign at its height. That brief, gilded, overextended moment when Israel's wisest king sat at the center of a trade network that stretched from Egypt to Arabia to the cedar forests of Lebanon. The number is the annual weight of gold that flowed into Solomon's treasury, 666 talents. A recent study in the Journal of New Testament Studies has argued, carefully and with considerable scholarly weight behind it, that this is not a coincidence John overlooked. It is a coincidence John intended. The Solomon echo changes the texture of 666 without replacing the Nero reading. It does not cancel the cryptographic calculation. It layers beneath it, the way an older song can be heard underneath a newer one if you know both. Because Solomon, in the Deuteronomic tradition that shaped John's world, was not only the wisest king, he was also the cautionary king, the man who multiplied horses and wives and foreign alliances against the explicit command of the Torah, who opened his court to the gods of his foreign wives, who built the temple in glory and then presided over the slow corruption of everything the temple was supposed to represent. His gold was the symbol of a kingship that had slipped its covenant moorings and become indistinguishable in its appetites and its architecture from the empires around it. If 666 carries that echo, the beast is not only Nero, it is also Solomon, and the warning is not only about Roman persecution, it is about the deeper pattern, the one where even the people who were supposed to know better find themselves building temples to something that wears the face of wisdom and the body of accumulation. The beast is what happens when a civilization's most impressive achievements become the mechanism of its spiritual surrender. Hold that thought. Let it settle into the dark alongside the coin and the census and the animated statue. There is a third candidate, less prominent, more marginal, but worth the brief detour because it opens a different door. Some scholars, working from older and partly buried traditions, have noted that the name of the Egyptian Greek deity Serapis, calculated through ancient numerological substitution, also yields a figure that ancient sources associated with divine number play. Serapis was a synthetic deity, invented under the Ptolemies to bridge Egyptian and Greek religious sensibilities, associated with healing, with the underworld, with grain and abundance. His cult spread widely across the Mediterranean world that John's audience inhabited. The connection is not mainstream. It is a footnote in a crowded room of footnotes, but it is useful for a different reason than its mathematical precision. It is useful because it proves that John's audience lived inside a world already saturated with coded divine names, with rival cults, with the persistent belief that numbers carried sacred weight and that the names of powers could be hidden inside their sums. The riddle of 666 was legible to that audience, not because they were unusually sophisticated, but because they were ordinary people in a world where this kind of thinking was the ambient noise of religious life. The puzzle was designed for them. It fit the shape of the intellectual tools they already carried. Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, understood this, and his response to the riddle is instructive precisely because of what he refuses to do. He knows about the Nero reading. He knows about the 616 variant. He considers other candidates, Latanos, which encodes the Latin world, and Tatan, which carries associations with older mythological tyranny, and he concludes, with a candor that modern fundamentalist traditions rarely credit him for, that he does not know with certainty which name the number finally resolves to. He says that if the answer had been meant to be obvious, it would have been given plainly. It was not given plainly. Therefore, certainty on the matter is not available to him, and he declines to pretend otherwise. That intellectual honesty is its own kind of key. The beast's number was always designed to feel like a riddle under pressure. Not a problem with one clean solution, but a shape that fits multiple bodies, because the thing it describes is not a single man, but a recurring pattern of power. Nero is the pattern's first clear face. He is not its last. The beast does not require a specific emperor to keep existing. The beast requires a specific set of conditions: centralized authority that demands worship, an economy that enforces conformity, a spectacle of miracle and punishment that makes resistance feel cosmically futile, and a mark that turns the simple act of buying bread into an act of allegiance. When those conditions assemble themselves again, in any century, under any flag, the number can be recalculated, and the calculation will land somewhere recognizable. Modern readings that locate the mark in implanted microchips or cashless transaction systems are not wrong in their instinct, even when they are imprecise in their history. They are reaching, sometimes clumsily, for something the text genuinely contains: the warning that economies can become engines of worship, that the market can be a sanctuary of something you never agreed to reverence, that participation in a system is not automatically neutral just because the system calls itself neutral. Revelation's first concern is not the technology. The technology changes. The architecture of coercion it describes does not. What Revelation imagines, at its most philosophically serious, is a world in which idolatry has become infrastructure, in which the gods you serve are not named in any temple inscription, but are encoded in the terms of trade, the conditions of access, the quiet requirements of belonging to the civilization that surrounds you. The beast does not announce itself. That is the point. It rises from the sea looking like everything else that rises from the sea, like commerce, like security, like the reasonable price of not being destroyed. And then it asks for the forehead and the hand. And most people, in most centuries, have found ways to give both without fully understanding the transaction they were completing. You are lying in the dark now, and the room around you is ordinary and safe, and the empire outside your window has its own face on its own coins, and its own image in its own temples, and you have been carrying its marks without perhaps noticing their weight. That is not an accusation. It is what the text has always been saying, quietly, to whoever was willing to calculate. The story of how 666 became separated from its original meaning is, in its own way, as interesting as the number itself. It is a story about what happens when the hunted become the powerful, and the powerful need the texts of the hunted to say something different. For the first 3 centuries of its existence, the community that produced and circulated Revelation was a minority movement under intermittent and sometimes catastrophic imperial pressure. The beast was Rome, because Rome was killing them. The mark was the emperor's face on the coin, because the coin was the daily instrument of a system that demanded participation in a cult they refused. The anti-imperial reading was not a subversive interpretation of the text. It was the text. It was the only reading available to people for whom the empire was not an abstraction, but the thing that had executed their teacher and was currently deciding whether to execute them. Then Constantine converted, and the church became the empire, and the empire became the church. And Revelation's vicious, uncompromising portrait of Rome as a blood-drunk beast became a significant political inconvenience for an institution now seeking harmony with the Roman state rather than its destruction. The Book of Enoch, which had circulated widely among the Essenes at Qumran, which had shaped the apocalyptic imagination of early Christianity, which was quoted directly as inspired scripture in the canonical letter of Jude, was allowed to drift out of the Western canon almost entirely. It survived complete only in the Ethiopic tradition, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, while the rest of the Western world gradually forgot it existed. What survived in Enoch were the same themes that made Revelation uncomfortable: the corruption of earthly power, the rebellion of celestial beings who mistook their authority for ownership, the coming judgment of systems that had confused dominion with divinity. The suppression was not always a locked door and a burning manuscript. Sometimes it was quieter than that. Sometimes it was the slow accumulation of interpretive choices. The decision to read the beast as a future Antichrist rather than a present emperor. To locate the mark in a coming technology rather than a current coin. To defer the horror to a later age so that the horror of the present age could remain unexamined. When the political critique was moved to the future, the institution in the present became safe. The beast was always coming. It had not yet arrived. And the mark, therefore, was something you could watch for, rather than something you were already holding. That interpretive shift has consequences that reach all the way to this room, to this moment, to the version of the story you may have encountered before tonight. The popular imagination of 666 is almost entirely eschatological. It points forward, to a scanner, to a chip, to a digital transaction system that has not yet fully arrived. And there is something genuinely Revelation-shaped in that instinct, because the text does contain a forward-looking energy. It was written by someone who believed the end was near, who believed the beast would be judged, who believed the current order could not hold. That energy is real, but it was tethered, originally, to a specific historical body: Nero, Rome, the coin, the Charagma, the imperial cult in the market corridor of Ephesus. Remove that tether and the number floats free. and a floating number can land anywhere, which is both the text's greatest vulnerability and, in a strange way, its greatest power. Because the pattern is real even when the specific target changes. The warning about economies that demand worship, about systems that trade access for allegiance, about marks that colonize the hand and the forehead. That warning does not expire with the first-century empire that generated it. It describes something about the architecture of human power that recurs. Not because prophecy works like a schedule, but because certain configurations of authority and commerce and spectacle tend to reassemble themselves across time, wearing new faces over the same fundamental structure. The beast rises from the sea in every age that has a sea and a throne and a market and a population willing to marvel. John of Patmos knew this, in the way that people who have been pushed to the edges of a system always know things about the system that those at its center cannot easily see. He was writing from exile, from an island in the Aegean, addressed to communities living under the daily pressure of a civilization that asked for more than it said it was asking for. His number was a gift to them, a way of naming the thing that was pressing on their lives without naming it plainly enough to get them killed for the naming. 666. 3 digits carrying a dead emperor, a corrupted king, and a warning about every order that ever confused its own perpetuation with the will of the divine. The 2 inscriptions remain. On one side, the seal of the Lamb, pressed into the foreheads of those who refused the transaction. On the other, the mark of the beast, distributed through the infrastructure of daily survival to those who either could not or did not refuse. Revelation does not pretend the choice is easy. It does not pretend that the sealed are comfortable or the marked are monstrous. It only insists that the choice is real, and that the thing being chosen between is not merely political but cosmological. That what you give your hand and your forehead to is a question that reaches further than any single empire, any single century, any single coin. The calculation was left open on purpose. The riddle was designed to remain a riddle, so that every generation would have to do the arithmetic for itself. So that you would have to ask, whose number is this now? Whose face is on this coin? What am I participating in when I participate in the ordinary business of the world around me? And what does that participation quietly require of me in return? Those are not comfortable questions. They were not meant to be. Now let the questions go. Let them dissolve the way calculations dissolve when the hand finally puts down the pen. When the numbers stop meaning anything urgent and become just the sound of something old and enormous moving through a night that has already outlasted every empire it has ever carried. The markets of Ephesus are dust. The coins with Nero's face lie in museum cases behind glass, handled by no one, spent on nothing, the blasphemous titles around the portrait illegible now to most of the people who walk past them. The great temple at the head of the market road is foundation stones and conjecture. The beast that rose from the sea has gone back under, as beasts do, into the dark water that was always waiting for it. The calculation that once meant survival or death for a community huddled in the back rooms of houses in Western Turkey is now a question for scholars and sleepless people and the quiet curious who find themselves, late at night, wondering what the number was really about. You are one of those people. You always were. And you are lying in a room that no empire currently claims, in a darkness that belongs to no beast, with a forehead that carries no mark except the mark of your own long and complicated thinking about what it means to be alive in the world that surrounds you. The coin is not in your hand tonight. The market is closed. The image in the temple has stopped speaking, and the silence it has left behind is not frightening. It is the silence of something that tried very hard to last forever and discovered, the way everything discovers, that forever was not available. Feel the weight of your own body against the surface beneath you. Feel how much of you has nothing to do with any system, how much of you is simply breath and the darkness behind closed eyes and the slow unwinding of a day that is already becoming the past. The seal you carry into sleep tonight is your own. It carries no emperor's face. It carries no number that needs to be calculated, no riddle that needs to be solved before you are allowed to rest. What name, you might wonder, as the room goes softer? What name would you find if you pressed your fingers to your own forehead in the dark and read what was written there? The heavy doors of the Apocrypha Vault remain open. What was unsealed tonight does not close again. The number waits in the dark for those who return to calculate further. And you, for now, have no more counting to do. Only the long, quiet arithmetic of sleep, adding nothing, carrying nothing forward, resting in the remainder.
The deep calls to the deep. The sleeper awakens. We are ready.